Hey, y'all, I'm Zach, and this is episode 552 of the Lawyerist Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, Stephanie talks with Corinne Staves about non lawyer ownership of law firms. And today, I'm on my own on this intro. Nobody in the studio with me. Nobody keeping me from saying ridiculous things, I guess. So might have to be my own keeper today. But yeah, it's just me. Looking forward to getting you guys into the interview between Stephanie and Corinne. But before we get to that, we are a couple of days away from the ABA Tech Show in Chicago. We're also a couple of days past Stephanie's 50th birthday. And this is a big occasion, a big milestone birthday. And at Lawyers, we like to celebrate things. We like to celebrate our wins. We have a specific channel in our teams area. We tend to we try to celebrate stuff, celebrate each other, celebrate what we do. So we, in lawyerist fashion, are going to celebrate Stephanie while we're at the ABA Tech Show. So on April 3rd at 7 p.m., which is day one of the ABA Tech Show, we are going to have a party on the rooftop of Reggie's in Chicago, as you can imagine, because we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave the city in order to do this. We're going to be in Chicago, which is at 2105 South State Street in Chicago. We're just going to have a little get together with lawyers friends, lawyers acquaintances, people that have heard of Lawyerist. You're all welcome. If you're hearing my voice right now, you're all welcome to come and join us for the party. Space is limited, so maybe holler at us a little bit before, but we'd love to see you there. You don't have to wait for an invite or anything like that. But myself, Stephanie, and Jennifer will be running around the ABA Tech Show next week, handing out invites, talking to people. So if you remember while you're there that there's some sort of party going on, but you don't remember what it is, just ask us. But it is April 3rd, 7 p.m., Reggie's in Chicago on the rooftop. We're celebrating Stephanie's 50th birthday. I think we've got some sort of reversed gift thing going on. So just bring yourself, and we would love to see you all. So, but now here is Stephanie's conversation with Corinne Staves.
Hi, I'm Corinne Staves. I'm a partner at CM Murray LLP. We're a law firm in the UK, and we advise law firms on everything from setting up to governance to compensation and to different forms of structure.
Welcome to the show. I'm super excited for this conversation. I've been waiting for it because I think as part of your job and your role there in the UK, you've actually looked at and studied how non-lawyer ownership of law firms has actually impacted the industry. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. Well, we've had non-lawyer ownership as a potential for law firms for over a decade. So we've really got the hang of what that looks like in the UK and found our stride, really. Is it helpful for me just to talk about what that looks like?
That was going to be my next question. So yeah, for the listeners who may not know about the UK structure, I would love for you to kind of bring us up to speed onto what's allowed there.
Well, the short answer is that we have great flexibility. I mean, the regulator's role is to look at what's proposed and decide whether it's comfortable with it or not. But you can effectively think about any forms of ownership or management that don't have lawyers. Prior to that, you had to have some kind of legal qualification to either own or manage a law firm. And those are the two key features, really. It's the ownership or the management, the influence and the control over the firm that are really relevant here. In the UK, that's kind of played out in a number of different ways. The most common, actually, is where a firm wants to bring in a really important person that's not part of the legal profession, say the FD, head of IT, head of HR. There's really critical business people in the law firm, and they can be the same status as partners, whereas before they couldn't, for example, take profits from the business. So it's enabled firms to bring those really significant people through to be equivalent to partners. That's the most common example of external management, of external ownership by non-lawyers. Although we do see more sort of interesting options. For example, we see everything from there'll be an international law firm where you might have, for example, US lawyers who can come in because although US lawyers are lawyers. We don't consider US lawyers to be UK qualified enough to be UK lawyers, so you wouldn't necessarily have to get particular qualifications. You could just be approved by the SRA to own or manage a law firm. Again, that gives great deal of flexibility when you're looking at broader global businesses, for example. And then finally, in the UK, one thing that we're seeing more and more of is truly external investment. And PE is a big example of that, where people are saying, here, we've got a big pot of money. We'd like to invest in your firm to help you grow. And that's something we're sort of seeing really take off a bit more at the moment.
Well, lovely. Right now in the US, it's very limited. There's a couple of states who have opened up some sandboxes and have allowed some experimentation to happen. But I think there's generally a sense of fear is probably, I mean, there's a lot of reasons people are saying that they're against this, but I think they all boil down to fear. And I'm curious what you've seen, what has your research played out and how this actually impacts the legal profession?
To be honest with you, I think we were probably a bit afraid too. The driving force behind introducing this flexibility in the first place was to enhance competition and to provide better outcomes for consumers of legal services in the UK. And I mean, it's a completely different podcast to work out whether that's happened or not, but that was what was driving it. And I think we probably all were a little bit afraid, but actually, I think most practitioners in the profession would say that not a vast amount has changed. I mean, it has changed the competitive environment, but everything is constantly changing anyway. I mean, look at the way that technology is shaping the way that we're doing business from day to day this year in particular. So I think we're all perhaps naive to think that things aren't constantly changing, and this is just another element. The biggest factor really is that it enables some firm to have different forms of investment, of different forms of working capital, which could give them competitive advantage, for example. And I think the US experience to date does seem to be, I mean, I know it's very limited, has been around the accountancy firms expressing an interest in not being able to offer more services. And again, that was perceived as a huge threat to the UK market. I'm not going to pretend it hasn't changed the UK market. Obviously, it's relevant that the accountancy firms can offer everything, including legal services. But as I say, it hasn't been sort of a huge sort of volcano of change. It's more been adapting to different competitive pressures in the same way that firms always do.
Yeah. One of the concerns, and you address this too, is we tend to say, well, as a legal profession, we have an obligation to our clients. We have the rules of professional responsibility and ethical obligations, and there's a fear that outside investors wouldn't be beholden to those same rules, or they might be influenced differently. And how have you seen that play out, if you have, in terms of how it's impacted the client experience?
Mm. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that if anybody's thinking about changing their structure, about having non-lawyers kind of come into their business for the first time, that's got to be the priority, hasn't it? What's this doing for our clients? Because if our clients are happy, we'll be successful, we'll thrive as firms and as lawyers ourselves. So that's got to be the starting point. And to be honest with you, I think that lots of firms, when they're thinking about, next steps, whether it's external investment, whether it's non-lawyer owners, whether it's things like M&A activity, mergers, those sorts of things. Often people overlook the why. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve with this? What's our strategy here? And this is just another example of that. What is the strategy here? What are we trying to achieve? How does this serve our clients? And if you've got good answers to those questions, and the answers to those questions involve non-lawyer ownership, then I think you do have to think about some of those ethical considerations. But again, I think they are more things to think about than necessarily barriers in the large majority of cases. For example, you might think about your independence. If the extent of the non-lawyer ownership is so significant that your governance is completely controlled by a non-lawyer owner or by some kind of like external investor, you want to be absolutely confident that you can be independent, that you could, for example, do all the things that you would need to do to serve your clients appropriately and legitimately throughout. There would be some issues there. For example, if you are owned by a particular stakeholder, from an own interest perspective, you'll find yourself unable to litigate against them, for example. But those sorts of circumstances don't come up terribly often. I suppose there could be bigger issues if there was a particular sector. I mean, you look at things like sort of the banking sector or the insurance services, you'll find that their clients are driving client take-on decisions, so you can't ever act against insurers if you act for insurers, for example. And there are lots of examples of business like that, but we haven't found that that's been such a big issue in the UK because those businesses are not investing in other law firms. I guess the other thing I would mention when we're thinking about accountancy firms, and in the UK, we have obviously all the big four, for example, and they're operating with lots of lawyers operating out of their UK operations. They're going to have even more constraints, because you think about the big four accountancy firms, the audit regime is a really difficult one to deal with, and there's lots of constraints with the kind of the accountancy and the audit rules. And so that's another set of rules that these firms are going to have to contend with. Having said all that, there is a way through. Firms find a way through, and you've just got to add it into the pot of things you think about all the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in your role, are you helping firms or have you seen firms put in certain guardrails or protections in their governance structure to sort of navigate some of these issues that are coming up? I mean, that seems the obvious way, but
We do see some guardrails in governance and constitutions, and that's a really sound suggestion, to be honest with you. Lawyers in the UK, and I make no comment about US lawyers, are a very specific group of people. You know, we are proud to be law firm partners. We take a certain, kind of social significance from it. It's a profession. It's not just a job. And so one of the key things there when you're talking about non-lawyer ownership is thinking about how it infringes on that sense of identity that law firm partners have, and the relationships that law firm partners have with their clients, and those kind of bonds they've built as trusted advisors. So quite often it all gets built in with those aspects and the autonomy that the partners and the groups of partners want to retain. And most often in those circumstances, in alignment there, you wouldn't be thinking about partnering with a non-lawyer if they didn't share that vision, if they didn't share the values. And then it's just a question of complying with the regulatory framework, which is already baked in, because you can't operate as a law firm clearly without that sort of regulatory compliance. And of course, that's true across the US as well.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm curious if you've noticed any benefits that surprised you, things that maybe you didn't think of and anticipate, but now have played out and are good things.
It's a great question. And probably ask us again in another 10 years' time. We've seen some examples of really extreme examples of non-lawyer ownership where we've seen law firms listed on the different stock markets in the UK. And that hasn't been a success in lots of cases. There's one or two exceptions to that principle. So I guess that's sort of the opposite of the answer to your question, in the sense that we've seen a couple of things don't really work in that context. And I wonder whether it was just because of the businesses that went for it, if there will be better contenders for it, or whether that's because it's just not a good model. By contrast, I do think that this ability to bring through non-lawyer owners and managers like your FD, like your HR manager, like your IT manager is fantastic, because often these people, especially in the larger firms, in the smaller firms perhaps less so, but in the larger firms, are often incredibly significant people within the business, more so than sort of normal partners like me. So you need to think about how you reward and incentivize those people so that they're driving the success of the firm. So I think that is one of the success stories. And I think we're probably seeing the other potential success story play out as we speak, with the kind of increased interest in technology, and particularly in AI in the UK market, but I know across the legal services market, across the globe and in the US, firms are suddenly seeing that there is a much greater need for investments than perhaps they've felt ever before. They've been able to meet their working capital needs quite effectively. But now there is scope for huge investment in technology and really deriving benefits from that. And therefore, I think people are looking for external sources of finance. And therefore, I think what we're seeing now is that firms are thinking more carefully about those external sources of finance, for example, from PE, and that's just one example, but it's a really good one. We're also seeing it from litigation funders, for example. They're a good source of external finance in our market. And I guess we just have to wait and see how that plays out, particularly if people do take that funding, what the capital event looks like in 5 to 8 years' time, and how that impacts on things like the recruitment and retention of good people, good partners, and what that does to client relationships.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on two huge topics that I think the technology piece is talked about a lot here, that if we were to allow this investment money to come in, it would allow law firms to innovate faster and to keep up. But the other point you made is so important too, which is around retention and I guess even the recruitment of really qualified people who could have stock options and have ownership interest in other companies, but we want to recruit them and we don't have that same ability. And now we could and give them a piece of the pie, which would incentivize them in a different way and in a way that would be in alignment with the law firm's objectives. I think that's a point that isn't talked about enough here.
I completely agree. I think there's great scope for sort of innovation and imagination. I think that, and again, I say this from a place of love. I don't think we are necessarily the most innovative businesses that are out there, and I say that as a law firm partner myself. And so I think we sort of trail behind commerce in the true sense in that way. But I do think there are great opportunities there, and I think that we should be seizing them. I think we need to think a little bit about what that looks like for the next generation of lawyers, because we need to make sure that we have a really strong pipeline of the next generation of partners, of associates, of people in training, so that we get that kind of pure quality. Because I think the one thing that we've seen in the UK is that quality speaks. That's the most important thing, isn't it? For any model, it's got to be that you've got a quality offering that really meets your client's needs. And so if you can't assure that because of the changes or the innovation, then you've done something wrong.
It's such a great reminder because I think sometimes we can get caught up in the, I'm going to say hysteria, hysteria of like from everything from the non-lawyer owners to technology and AI it's a good reminder that at the end of the day, it comes down to, are you serving your clients? Are you delivering a quality product? Because that's ultimately what's going to drive business forward. So I really appreciate that because I do think we lose sight of it sometimes. I'm curious to shift gears just slightly. You know, the audience of our firm, of our podcast, as we kind of mentioned, is often smaller firms. And I feel like there's also a fear that this might allow larger firms, we're already seeing it with the big four accounting firms, really take a stronghold in the market and become these behemoths that really hurts small firms and small business. And I'm kind of curious if you've seen any of that play out or how you've seen maybe small firms react in the UK to stay competitive.
It's a great question, and I think that's is true of the UK market as well in terms of those perspectives. I think it is true, and let's go back to the accountancy giants, that it is the mid-market that is probably most threatened. So the Magic Circle firms and the US firms operating in the UK and in London are not facing those same competitive pressures because they're seen as the sort of the top end advisors with the high rates and the high and clients that can stomach that. But if you look at the UK market and the mid-market and the smaller side of things in terms of the number of partners and the amount of turnover and profits and so on, there is a squeeze going on at the moment. And those firms are facing increased costs. So, everything from inflation to salaries increasing and so on and so forth. And clients, whilst they will accept some increases to rates, won't, that isn't a blank check. For those of you that remember checks, apologies. And so we face this pressure, and these firms are, they might be innovative, but they're not necessarily got the same war chest to be able to make changes, and so they'll continue to do what they know, and so they're seeing profits starting to sort of dampen or flatten. Some years be less profitable, so that sort of growth trajectory that firms are expecting isn't following. So there is that pressure there, and we're seeing a lot of consolidation in our markets of, say, mid-sized firms, smaller firms merging. There are a number of consolidators in our business, in our markets, where these large consolidated businesses are going around and sort of gobbling up little firms here, there, and
Mhm.
everywhere. Sometimes it's to bring them all under the same brand. Sometimes it's so that people can keep their own brand and then they can operate, but with the sort of the back office and the support supplied centrally. So yeah, and I think that external ownership permits those. I mean, one of the key consolidators is listed, for example, and that wouldn't be possible if we couldn't have external ownership. So I think we are seeing that, but it's not just the external ownership which is driving that; it's commercial pressures which is driving that, and external ownership does provide several other options, I suppose, for firms that are facing those pressures. But what I would say, it isn't a panacea. The the consolidators, for example, they want to buy a good business. And a good business is not one where the partners have failed to plan for succession properly, or the partners have allowed the clients to sort of dwindle away and to be not competitive and to not know strategically what it is that they're trying to achieve. If they're trying to do all things for all people, chances are they're not doing anything well for anyone. So, it has to still be the same principles apply. You have to have a well-run business. You have to know what you're trying to achieve. And that's the same whether you're going to be gobbled up by a consolidator, whether you're going to merge with another law firm, or whether you're going to continue to go it alone.
Music to my ears. I agree. If you get to put on, your advice hat and say, okay, US, we're ahead of you. You're coming along. Here's our chance to tell you some best practices or maybe even potential pitfalls. What would you tell US law firm owners today that they should be thinking about?
Well, I think we've probably covered most of those messages, frankly, because it is about understanding what are you trying to achieve, what are you good at, what do your clients need you to do, and not being all things to all people. And I think that clear understanding of what you are trying to achieve strategically drives everything for firms, whether it is, as I say, being looking for a merger or expanding or shrinking, whatever it is, laterally hiring good partners in your own marketplace, in your location, expanding domestically, whatever it is, you need to know what it is you're trying to achieve. And then you can go, okay, so if we can have someone external come in and be an owner or a manager, what are they bringing to that mission? What are they going to contribute that will help us achieve it quicker or more effectively than we would have done without that external investment? I think one of the risks in the UK market, and we do see it play out occasionally, is that this extra money that external investment can sometimes represent could be an opportunity for the current generation of the most senior partners to cash in, basically, as
Mhm.
that sort of selling the family silver. And there's only one chance to do that, really. We don't value goodwill generally in law firms in the UK, and I understand the same is true of the US. We do in other sectors, accountancy, you see it much more regularly, for example, but we don't in the UK and in legal services. And therefore, there is this opportunity for people to say, "Oh, I could have taken income out every single year on a full distribution model, and get a nice lump sum at a point at which I'm nearer retirement." That sounds really attractive to me, and I think it is a very enlightened and mature law firm partner who says, "Actually, no, this isn't actually my business to sell." It's a bit different for founders, maybe, of first generation firms. But generally speaking, this is not my business to sell. This is not my money to earn. I'm not entitled to this lump sum any more than the people who came before me or the people that come after me. My job is as a custodian here to make this firm stronger for the next generation of lawyers and to serve the clients. And I think that little carrot of some kind of capital sum can distort things. So I guess I would warn law firm leaders to think carefully about what's driving that sort of capital transaction, if indeed that's what's on the cards. Is it a legitimate opportunity to grow the business and to serve clients and to make the business strong for the next generation? Or is there actually a little bit of, actually, this is a nice little pot for retirement? And is that driving it? Is that voice loudest, and should it be loudest?
Any thoughts on where the UK's headed? Like, this just exists now? Will it continue to evolve? And if so, maybe any thoughts on what you guys might see next?
We had a great sort of period of flexibility, and that's been great in many ways. There've also been one or two high profile examples of consolidation activity where it hasn't been successful, and I think that's always going to be the case. Whatever models you have, you see firms thrive and fail regardless of the external model. But our regulator in the UK has in England and Wales has faced some criticism for the way in which it's allowed firms to expand and to grow. And I fear that there's going to be a bit of a knee-jerk over the next couple of years in terms of that there being a bit of a dampener on that sort of growth activity and consolidation activity. If you think about it, there is not much stopping a law firm from failing. It's continuing to serve your clients. We are not selling something that we manufacture with years worth of advance orders or many, many years worth of sort of advance orders. It is really, we are serving people with the knowledge and the ability of our lawyers. And therefore, things can change quite quickly. If clients leave, if partners leave, you can quickly see a very successful firm become an unsuccessful firm. And it will still have those overheads. So I guess the point there is that law firms need to continue to do what they're doing But there is scope to fail quite quickly for all law firms. I don't mean to catastrophize, but that is true. It depends on clients continuing to instruct us. And so I think those distress situations will still lead to those consolidations, whether it is people coming in and sort of gobbling up little firms, or succession not really working through correctly. So I think we're always going to face these distress situations, and these they're just going to be a feature of the legal services sector, and that there's always going to be a place to deal with that. And different ownership models might provide a bit more flexibility in those circumstances, possibly.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly keep an eye out. And obviously, the discussion will continue here in the US. For anyone who's listened to the show for any amount of time, you'll know that we think it's going to happen. And we think it can be a positive thing on the entire industry. And so I love the advice that you gave today because it's actually what we say too, like build a great business, right? Focus on your firm, focus on your strategy, build it well. And then no matter what happens, you're going to be well positioned for the
I
future.
completely agree. I completely agree. That's got to be at the heart of everything we're doing, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on with me today. I have enjoyed our conversation and I'm glad to hear that things are, not going crazy over there after all this cuz that's if you read social media here, then that's what people are led to believe. Like as soon as we flip this switch, we're all going to hell in a handbasket and that isn't actually the case. So thank you.
Probably not. No.